Welcome to Spotlight ETSU. I'm your host, Carrie Oliveira. Today, the spotlight shines on music with Dr. Heather Killmeyer from the ETSU Department of Music. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
I'm so happy you asked me to be here.
I am super excited that you're here because anytime I get to talk to an artist or a musician, it's like some mind-blowing experience because I don't understand anything about that. So you're going to talk to us about oboes and chamber music and alternative applications of music. So this sort of innovative way you're teaching your students to apply music in a more practical context as opposed to just like orchestral performances,
as opposed to just waiting for somebody to call you, offering you a gig, basically.
You know, because you have to be pretty fantastic for that to happen. So we have to seize opportunities.
Right, you have to be proactive.
We will get there. So tell us about you and how you came to be at ETSU.
I'm an oboist, which means I play the oboe. I spend many hours of my time playing oboe, making oboe reeds. We make our own mouthpieces.
You make your own reeds?
Yes, we take a plant that's like bamboo, Arundodonax. It grows very tall in stalks. We normally get that from...
Wait, first you grow your own plants?
No, we
Okay.
we normally get it from suppliers.
You're botanists also.
Right. No, I don't know. I kill everything I try to grow. We get it. It used to always come from the Var region of France. Nowadays, we're getting it more from Australia, Argentina, China, places like that.
Is it kind of like grapes and wine? Like there's a certain geographic place that grows the right...
The Mediterranean type of climate with lots of sunshine grows nice oboe cane. But that's valuable real estate. So we kind of get it wherever we can, and we'll process the cane. We have machines to help us with that. They're all manually powered, though. You pushing the blades and everything. It's good for your triceps.
I would imagine.
And we whittle the cane down to make sure it vibrates. And it's a process that takes some practice, a few years of practice. But
I would imagine.
It is. Most little girls don't grow up learning how to whittle thin pieces
sure
of
didn't.
wood.
No.
I did not either. So I switched to oboe in 7th grade, and it just kind of clicked with me. I just took to it.
What did you start with?
I started with piano at 5 because my older brother played piano, and after about a year or two, I decided I did not like piano anymore. Except my mom kept making me take it for another like 8 years after that. But I was a terrible pianist. Reading 2 clefs at once does not, your right hand generally treats treble. Yeah, I was really bad at that. And then in 4th grade, I started on flute. And I liked the flute, okay, but I got kind of bored with it quickly.
So you always were a musician, like from the time you were itty bitty, you knew that you were good at playing music.
I just kind of had a knack for it, I guess. So.
Is your family musical?
They all say they aren't, but they are. My grandmother was an organist at her church for 62 years. She learned to play when she started playing at church.
That's with 2 keyboards, right?
2 keyboards. You also have a keyboard with your feet that you operate, foot pedals. That are laid out the same way as a keyboard is.
I can't barely drive my stick-shift car, never mind. Like,
yeah, you have to be very, very coordinated. So she played that for 62 years
awesome.
In her church. The nuns taught her to play. And my
Nuns
mom,
are awesome too.
Yes, and my mom has always sung in choirs and things like that. And my dad thinks he has no musical talent.
I bet he can play the banjo or something without trying.
He can whistle like amazingly well, perfectly in tune. He doesn't understand that
That's
takes
music,
real skill.
Right.
Yeah.
I whistle about as well as I sing.
Well, playing and singing in tune or whistling in tune is hard to do.
That's
so.
amazing.
Yeah.
So from the time you were a small kid, you were like musical and playing piano, and you picked up the flute, and then in 7th grade there was the oboe, and then you grew up and still you were an oboist.
Basically, I added bassoon in 9th grade because my oboe teacher had said.
I added the bassoon.
Well, there was a bassoon for sale in the local music store, used bassoon, and used bassoons generally don't show up in music stores very often. They're very expensive instruments, and they can last a really long time if you take care of them. A lot of professional bassoonists try to get bassoons that were made before World War I because they think it's particularly a good vintage for bassoons by that manufacturer. So this bassoon showed up at the music store, and it was reasonably priced for a bassoon. And my oboe teacher at the time said, you know, you might want to learn bassoon because you never know, you might get hired at a college that with a small music department where they have one person who teaches both oboe and bassoon.
She didn't actually say that to you.
No, she actually did.
How many years ago this would have been?
That was when I was in 9th grade, so it was a very long time ago.
It's been a while ago.
Yes.
And in fact, that is exactly what what your fate has been ultimately.
Yes,
You teach
yes.
here in a small, relatively small music department, both oboe,
Both oboe and
and
bassoon.
bassoon.
Down
And the
to
one person on the entire campus who does that.
Yes.
That was really good foresight on her part.
It was. I'm very grateful.
How long have you been at ETSU?
This is my second year, so not very long. I'm still new faculty.
And you came sort of immediately from Texas.
From Texas. I was in San Antonio. I spent 3 years there as a freelance performer and teacher. I played with a lot of orchestras down there, the San Antonio Symphony and Corpus Christi Symphony and the Victoria, Texas Symphony. And I had, my last year had 48 weekly students that I would see, which is a lot.
So many.
It's a lot of students.
Because you're not teaching them all at once. It's not like 48 students in a classroom. It's like 48 individual lessons.
Yes. Both oboe and bassoon. So it was a lot. I was busy, but you know, you really get great at diagnosing student issues, and you know,
it makes you a spectacular instructor, I would imagine.
Right. As my best friend says, he's a clarinetist down there who still does that. He says, I can teach my way out of a paper bag. And it's definitely true.
Super useful. I think it's weird that there are like, what grade were these students that you were teaching?
They were generally 6th grade up to 12th grade.
So like 11-year-olds.
For the most part, and I do like teaching middle school.
You get 11-year-olds who think to themselves, yes, I'm going to play the bassoon.
Well, they're so excited about it. It's
oboe.
fantastic. Yeah.
That's groovy. I like that. So you did that for 3 years, and you've been all over the place. You went to school in California. You went to school in Nevada.
I did.
Ohio.
Cincinnati, Ohio, at the conservatory. Yes.
And you're from Baltimore.
From Baltimore.
Originally.
Yeah.
Well-traveled.
Yes, I have a weird accent.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that. I can't quite figure out like that sort of southern, sort of northeast coast thing.
That's what moving does.
Absolutely.
Messes with your accent.
So you're here, and so what is your primary sort of like? You're, you know, when they hire you, sort of your teaching philosophy or whatever. So you're here teaching oboe and bassoon to our music students, but your approach to teaching them is to not necessarily do music in the way that people typically think about doing music. Like, okay, I'm going to learn this classical instrument and go hopefully get hired on a symphony or an orchestra somewhere. And that's not the way you approach teaching your students.
Right. I mean, there are schools that really specialize in that. That's a very specific skill. Winning an orchestra job is a very specific skill for people who want performing degrees. And I have performing degrees, but I never had the desire to just play in an orchestra. I love performing, but I actually am very sensitive about my ears. Early hearing loss runs in my family. So I prefer playing in chamber orchestras, and I like doing kind of unusual recitals and solo recitals and things like that. So I myself never had a desire to train specifically for just playing in an orchestra. I also really wanted to teach, and I wanted that to be the central focus of my career. So if a student really wants to do something like just get ready for a life in a symphony orchestra, you can do that. You can specialize in that, and I can help students with that.
Right.
But what I'm trying to do is teach students some of the practical business side of making a career in music.
Because I imagine that's difficult. Like the idea of, before the interview, before we started filming, I was talking to you about there's a commercial for shingles, like a shingles vaccine, and the woman in the commercial is a bassoonist. Is that the right word?
Yes.
Okay. So she's a bassoonist, and she was talking about how having shingles almost ended her career. And I thought to myself, how incredibly difficult is it to get paid to play music?
Well, there's getting paid, but then there's also making a living.
Right. I mean, anybody can get paid. I mean, you stand on a street corner with your guitar case open.
Right.
Well, I guess your bassoon case.
Yeah. And most orchestras don't pay a living wage, and a number of orchestras have had their salaries cut. They keep taking salary cuts, the members, in order to keep the orchestra alive.
Which is really terrible, because you have to be exceptional, I would imagine, to play in an orchestra, to be invited to play in an orchestra.
And the truth is, there are plenty of exceptional musicians out there. You also have to be really incredibly lucky for, in that moment, for everything to come together. And there's differing opinions on how people think an oboe should sound. I sound nothing like my students, and I don't sound like my teachers, because the sound I have in my ear is just...
Can an audience hear the difference?
I think so. I think
an oboist or
No, I think people can definitely hear it. You could hear the difference between a 5th grader who's learning how to play and a senior. I mean,
that's probably true.
Right, and even if they play the exact same notes, you'll hear a difference in tone and things like that. So, yeah.
So you're trying to enable your students to like make a living.
I would like them to be able to have whatever the career is that they want. If they want to make a living through music, it's possible, but you have to be very creative,
right?
And you have to be somewhat aggressive in terms of seeking out your own opportunities.
Right.
If they want to teach, a lot of our students are studying music education, so they're going to get their certification to teach in a public school, which I highly respect. I myself was never really able to do that. I don't think I could do that. But if they want to keep some performance aspect in their life, they need to know how to go out and achieve that. Yes, marketing.
Themselves.
And nowadays, more music departments are finally starting to realize that they need to teach students these skills.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's all well and good that you can play an instrument proficiently, even like exceptionally. But I mean, if there's nobody willing to buy that talent.
Right. And actually,
you can become an accountant like everybody else, I guess.
Exactly. And with just about any degree, I mean, what are people who get degrees in English or psychology?
Communication studies.
Yeah, you learn real valuable skills from that, but people frequently struggle with, how do I translate those skills to a new profession? How do I convince a potential employer that I'm capable of doing these things? Regardless of your degree,
yes,
the skills you learned in obtaining your degree are very, very valuable and marketable.
Immensely. Right, okay. So we're gonna talk some about that. You have, we have an example here of an alternative application of music in an art situation. And so we're going to look at a video here in a second. But this opportunity came about because an art student, was it an art student?
She was doing her a thesis.
Thesis,
yes.
Okay. And so she did this sculpture installation kind of as her final thesis art project, and she contacted you guys and asked for what?
She asked for a student to do 2 hours of improvisation, and she said I would like
oboe improvisation.
Well, she said oboe or flute or violin or something like that, and I'm pretty proactive when I hear things about this. I always immediately try to figure out how can I find a way to make this work.
Right.
So I replied to her email and I said, well, first, please understand.
We don't really improv these kinds of things.
No, I mean, generally flute and oboe and violin don't do a lot of improvisation in general, and that's also part of the education system. Is if you have an instrument that does both classical and jazz, like saxophone or string bass, you're normally pushed to choose one path or the other early on.
Right.
And that's what you specialize in. Oboists, by and large, don't get degrees in jazz or in improvisation. So I said, okay, but I have a student that I think would be up for the challenge.
Right.
I said, but 2 hours is a little bit too long, so here's what I'll do. She was offering a little bit of pay, and so I said, you can pay my student to do the first hour, and then I will do the second hour. And so we spent a couple of lessons where we had her practice improvisation. We had her do it in our weekly studio class, where I had other students challenge her with some ideas and say, okay, you know.
So like a musical version of, what is that show with Drew Carey and whatever else? What line? Whose line is it?
Oh, I guess so. Yeah. Whose line is it anyway?
So you've got a bunch of music students sitting in a room, and somebody with this was an oboe she was playing.
Right.
So, and they were like, okay, play like happy oboe.
Yeah, like if something frenetic or even like images. I had my oboe instructor at University of Southern California, Alan Vogel, tremendous oboist and one of the kindest people I've ever known. He has degrees from, I believe it's Yale, in English literature. And so a big part of his teaching is he would always use very descriptive words. He would say, like for a certain musical phrase, he'd say, imagine, I think of a stone skipping over water. And that gives you a very different image than just saying, okay, I want you to crescendo here and then go to this, emphasize this note. So some of the students were putting out adjectives, like see if you can make it sound like bubbles or raindrops, just to
That's so cool.
Yeah, just to kind of put the pressure on her a little bit in the studio, so she was ready when she was in public at the gallery.
So we're gonna take a look at this here real quick. This is I will say these sculptures are a little unnerving. It's like
They are
hanging sort of body sculptures, and so if we can take a look at this little video here, which I'm supposed to be looking at now. And so your student, what we're listening to is your student in the background playing the oboe.
Yes, improvisation.
Improv.
So she had no music in front of her. This is what she basically composed in her head at the time that she played it.
That is enormously talented. And so these are hanging, right?
They're hanging, then there's a light and other images that Melissa, the artist Melissa Cadell, projected onto the walls. So there was this multiple dimension going on in terms of the space. She had the three-dimensional sculptures and then the lighting behind it, and then also the music filling up the gallery space.
And so I would imagine, very unnerving sort of visual image. But of course, the music that's going on in the background is going to evoke something that we see, right? It's going to change how we see what we're looking at with our eyeballs. And so, do you know anything? I mean, you also spent an hour improving the music behind this installation as well. And so, I mean, the sculpture doesn't change really. So, I mean, except the background images might change a little bit. But I mean, for the most part, the art is what it is. And so, how did you decide what it was that you were going to play?
Well, we both had very different approaches. If Melissa had recorded, I don't know if she recorded what I played, but what I played was very, very different than what my student.
That was sorry.
No, that's okay. It was very different than what Jessica played, and I think everybody that was in the gallery during those 2 hours, if you had asked them if it made any difference or if they had been looking at it in silence, I mean.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if maybe people even just would have lingered longer, the fact that there was music
there
playing. We both had a number of people come and talk to us, you know, after we finished because they were just curious. And most of the people who were at the gallery knew what an oboe is, because generally oboists meet a lot of people who don't know what an oboe is, so we frequently,
I think it was one of the first questions I asked you when I met
That's
you.
okay.
I don't know what an oboe is.
That's all right. You have to be an advocate for the instrument.
Indeed. I mean, you have to advocate for whatever it is that you're into.
Right.
So it's apparently a double-reeded instrument, I've learned.
Yes.
And it tapers.
Yes, it's conical.
Conical.
Right.
Like a cone.
Yeah, like brass instruments are conical also. So narrow opening that gradually flares out. It's heavier than a clarinet. It's a smaller tube where you hold it, and again, the different mouthpiece. So
you used a word earlier before we started filming, something about tonguing or something.
Oh, flutter tonguing.
Flutter tonguing.
Yes.
This is a musical skill.
It's a technique that shows up sometimes in very modern music. I had to spend a while practicing it because I grew up speaking English in Baltimore. I could not roll my R's for a long time.
Oh.
So you just.
Is this something you can eventually learn how to do? I mean,
I
did roll my tongue. I didn't realize that. I just assumed everybody can roll their tongue.
No, not everybody can.
Oh.
For sure. No, definitely not. So.
Can you curl your tongue?
I can, but one of my oboe teachers could not, and that's a genetic, from what I understand, recessive trait.
Yeah.
So.
Does that help to play the oboe? Being able to do
I
that?
imagine it could. I have friends that can articulate much faster than I can. And if you think about it, everybody physically is different. When I teach embouchure for oboe students, I always keep in mind
what is embouchure for the folks of us who are not?
Well, embouchure is basically how you use your mouth when you're playing the instrument.
Right.
So I tell students to put the reed on the front half of their bottom lip before they roll it in, as opposed to.
What if you have a little skinny bottom lip? And
Well, I have little skinny bottom lips, but front half, that kind of works universally,
right?
Regardless of the size of an individual student's lips.
Okay, right. So relative to your own face.
Right.
Right.
Right. And you know, the shape of our oral cavity, you know, when you go to the dentist, I have a mouth guard because I grind my teeth, and when they fit the form in to make the plaster cast, they have a number of different sizes and also different shapes. Because people's teeth are all going to be very different. Some people are missing teeth.
Right.
You know? Some people have very, very small, short vocal cords, smaller tongues. Some people, as you know, have very long tongues.
Right.
So all of those things are going to contribute to, if you have two people who play on the same exact oboe, they switch oboes, same exact reed,
And
they're going to sound different.
because of the physiology of the person.
The physiology of the person and whatever you hear in your ear.
That's
when you
so
go to play.
cool. I have nothing. I would love to be able to play an instrument. I'm envious
It's
of
never
musical
too late
people.
to learn. I have several adult students.
Okay, I was going to ask about that, just sort of like a music program standpoint, sort of a thing. You know, I have several of my students are very musical in my department in communication studies, and they're like music minors or whatever, so they like play things. So what if I did want to learn how to play the oboe? Can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not going to laugh me out because this is one of the things I'm sort of like afraid of as somebody who's really unmusical, and I have a recognition of the fact that I'm unmusical. But like, say I wanted to learn how to play the guitar or whatever else, and I go to the music department and I say, hey, I want to take like guitar classes. You guys are going to be like, yeah, no, we're not going to teach you anything because you don't have skills at all.
I think you would be surprised by how open most musicians are. The majority of us like teaching, and that's why we do teach. And it's really satisfying to watch somebody progress as they go. I frequently, I say to my students, do you remember what you sounded like 2 months ago?
Do you record your students so they can play it back? Like, so after 2 or 3 months of lessons, they can go back and be like, oh, I did it back to
I should more often. My best friend does that, and a lot of his students were not listening to themselves, their recordings, but it's different with younger kids. They're busy. But yeah, we have a number of non-majors in the music department here at ETSU who just didn't want to give up playing an instrument, even though they're majoring in biology or
something
exercise science
or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what is practical?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question.
I mean, my dad sells insurance. My dad makes a good living selling insurance.
Yes.
But he was one of the people who encouraged me the most to do something that would make me happy.
Joy.
I mean, yes, nobody calls their insurance agent just to say, hey,
No,
I just want to let you
sure
know
don't.
I love my insurance.
I'm really appreciative of this long-term care policy
Right.
that I'm not on claim with yet or whatever else. But
Exactly.
I just, thank you for selling it. No.
Right.
No,
So,
that's
I mean, there are a lot of things in life to consider in terms of what makes you happy, so it's all
teaching completely
choices.
talentless, poor social scientists.
I have yet to have any student that's completely talentless.
Really?
To be honest.
Oh,
Yes.
that sounds like a challenge that you have just laid down to its entire viewing audience. Untalented musicians, please.
We all have things that we're good at.
Better at than others.
Right,
Certainly.
and there are many aspects of playing an instrument. So I myself, I have a very slow, labored tongue that I've spent many, many years trying to get my tongue faster and working on double tonguing. That doesn't come easy to me. Technical things, that's a little bit easier. So we all have things that we're good at, even within playing a certain instrument.
I find all of that totally fascinating. So you and I were talking before the interview started, and so kind of getting back to the way you approach teaching your students is to make themselves marketable as musicians if you want to make a living playing music, and so seizing opportunity. So some of the things that you've done as examples of seizing opportunity as a musician, you were telling me that you used to play music in like a chamber thing in a funeral home? A former funeral parlor?
Yeah, the Mortuary Orchestra of Guerneville.
Mortuary Orchestra of Guerneville, California.
Guerneville, California. It's a small resort town north of San Francisco, and a very good friend, Seth. He left the San Francisco area, relocated to Guerneville, and fabulous pianist. I mean, he made his debut with the Denver Symphony, I want to say, when he was 9 or something. Just amazing.
Wow.
And he moved up to Guerneville and decided he was going to kind of start a little music school up there, so he could continue playing and support other musicians and give them a place to play outside of the city of San Francisco. And so this studio that he rented to house this music school used to be a funeral parlor, basically. So when we played, there was a mural along the back wall, and they had casket lights that shone on that wall, and we basically would fit the very small chamber orchestra inside that space. And he was always very open to including many different types of things on the program. We would have people recite their poetry that they wrote.
And would you guys do a musical accompaniment to poets, or were they just...
No, but I've always dreamed of doing that. I really want to be on Def Poetry Jam and play.
I feel like there should be a way for that to happen.
There should.
You know what? Now you're going to create an opportunity for yourself, and that would make a fine example. So, in this weird little former funeral parlor, you're playing oboe. What, by the way, is a chamber orchestra?
Chamber orchestra is basically a smaller sized orchestra. It's
what exactly is an orchestra?
An orchestra is
that a weird question?
No. An orchestra is an ensemble. It's a collection of certain types of instruments. And the typical symphony orchestra, we have strings, violin, viola, cello, bass. We have pairs of woodwinds. We might even have more than pairs. So flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon. But we might also have English horn, which is like a big oboe, or contrabassoon. You might have a third clarinet or piccolo. And then
Those are the little tiny ones.
Right, very high pitched. And then we'll also have brass section. So like in
and a triangle. Somebody's going to play
yeah,
a triangle.
there's going to be a percussion section. The percussion is the biggest section in terms of types of instruments.
Right.
You can make sound by hitting just about anything.
I was having this conversation with somebody. Is a piano considered a string or a percussion instrument?
Well, it's kind of a mix of both. Because it is striking the string.
Yes, so your percussion
piano is
on the
very
string.
versatile. So often you'll have a piano as part of an orchestra.
So, if your students want to come in and be like, yes, I want to make a living playing music, you could just say to them, be talented and be creative.
Well, work hard.
Work hard.
I mean, you really just have to.
That's just good life advice.
Of course, yeah.
Doesn't matter what you're trying to do with it. Yes.
Right.
You have to work hard at playing your music and being creative and crafting opportunities for yourself. And I think I love that the most about the way you go about teaching your students. Like, make something for yourself. Gosh darn it.
Right. Because nobody's just going to hand you a roadmap that says, okay, here's what you do next, and here's what you do next. And that's regardless of any degree that you get.
As a teacher, give a student a roadmap. Like, okay, so once you graduate from our program, here's the typical path you take. Whether those opportunities are going to present themselves or not is nothing you can control, nothing the student can control, really. And so it is really about crafting for yourself, carving out your way.
They really have to think for themselves. And even if a lot of times music students will say, well, I still want to continue playing. And I say, okay, but really what does that mean?
Right.
You want to continue playing.
I mean, you can play on your back porch all day long. Like.
Right. Hopefully you'll still practice and still break out your instrument. But if you want to perform, what do you want to do? Do you want to start your own woodwind quintet? And do you want your woodwind quintet?
Can you do that?
Yeah, sure. And does your woodwind quintet play wedding gigs where you're going to play Pachelbel canon and things like that? Do you want to do that? There's nothing wrong with that. Or do you want to do like so-called serious music where do you want to play at the Carnegie?
Right.
Gigs there. I mean, what does that mean?
You just have to make good choices about how you plan on getting there.
Right. And they have to really think through what it is that they're
have a vision for your life and your career.
Right.
Good life advice you're giving.
Right.
Are you doing anything cool that we can see you play, or are you playing anywhere groovy? Funeral parlors?
I'm thinking about.
Botanical gardens.
I just played my faculty recital on September 20th, and I did like this mix of new music, and I played a jazz piece with two of the other members of Martin. Walters, who's actually in the communications department. Martin's fabulous.
Yes.
Randy Sanderbeck, who's our percussion professor in music. And I had been thinking to myself, well, I just played a recital, and we normally do maybe one a year, but I kind of want to do something in the spring. And I found a piece that's normally for oboe and double bass. Perfect example. There's a couple, married couple.
Like 30 seconds.
Married couple who plays oboe and bass has all this repertoire that they've created, and Mr. Walters is very busy, so I think I'll have our tuba player professor play with me, oboe and tuba duets.
And where might we be able to see this happen?
We'll find some place in town. I might do something different than usual Mathis Hall, because you might as well go out and find a unique venue, go to the people instead of having them come to you.
And I think that's of everything that you and I talked about before the interview started was sort of this mission you have to make classical music in particular accessible to people, where we don't have to like go out and
you don't have to dress up.
I don't have to wear a tuxedo. I can go sit in a gazebo in the grass and whatever else. Thank you so much, Dr. Killmeyer, for being here with us. We've had Dr. Killmeyer on Spotlight ETSU. Please join us next time.